So today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to flash people in the streets, like with your camera. So put away your trench coats and let's learn how to do flash street photography. So first things first, you got to have a flash. There are two main types of flashes. You can either get a manual flash or a TTL flash. A manual flash is pretty self-explanatory. It's very straightforward. It's just a flash that has no communication with your camera. So it functions purely manually. You have to adjust the power on the settings on the flash, and that's pretty much all they can do. Some of them may have some like automated modes, but they're not true automation because they don't actually speak to your camera. The other major type of flash is a TTL flash. TTL stands for through the lens metering. And so what this does is that it emits a small pre-flash and actually automatically adjusts the flash power based on what it receives through the lens. So this is great because it can automatically compensate for changing lighting conditions and whatever's happening in front of your scene, if the subject's closer or further away. On most of these flashes, you can even adjust the amount of flash that it puts out using the flash compensation dial that a lot of them have. When buying one of these flashes, you just want to make sure that it's configured for TTL for your camera system. They will not work correctly on other camera brands. So if you buy a Fujifilm flash and put it on a Sony flash, it will not work as a TTL flash, but if it has a center pin and doesn't use a proprietary connector, then it'll work as just a regular manual flash. So outside of whether your flash is TTL or a manual flash, there's a variety of other factors you want to consider. One of them being form factor. Is the flash small, large? For street photography, I like to keep something pretty small on me. The other one is its flash spread. So how wide of a light does it put out? If you shoot wide angle lenses, you want to be really aware of that. Some flashes are actually somewhat narrow, so you'll get some vignetting in your image. Another one is power level. How strong is your flash? If you have a weak flash, you may not be able to use it during daytime. It might be more of like a nighttime thing, or it might just be like a very light fill during the day. Another one's power source. So does it have a lithium-ion battery built into it? Is the battery interchangeable? Can you actually just use regular AA or AAA batteries? Those are all things to consider. Refresh or recycle time is also very important. That's how quickly can it recharge up and be ready to shoot out another flash. Oftentimes you'd get an overpowered flash and shoot it at like 1/8 power, so that way the refresh time is very quick. And the other thing to think about is how do you connect to it? I like to shoot a lot of off-camera flash, so you might want to think about getting one that is wireless or that has a flash cable like I have here. So what are my personal preferences when it comes to purchasing a flash? I personally like a flash that is a manual flash, so it doesn't have TTL, and that's just for the same reason that I like shooting in manual mode. I like the consistency and control I get from knowing exactly what all of my settings are doing. The other thing I really like to think about in flashes is size. I like these small flashes that actually can fit in this palm of my hand. I usually shoot them off camera like this with a flash sync cable. I've used wireless flashes in the past and they're either inconsistent because the trigger might fall asleep, or that the trigger might get triggered by your friend's flash if you're shooting in a group and they might have the same flash as you, or they just like get interference and don't go off when I want the picture to happen. And that's super frustrating. So with a wired flash, it's almost guaranteed that the picture is going to happen with the flash at the right time. And finally, the last thing I look for in a flash is, does it run on AA batteries? This flash does. I have 2 rechargeable AA batteries, so I can recharge this at home. And I can also buy new batteries when I need to. If I'm out shooting and I run out of these batteries, I can just pop into a 7-Eleven and continue shooting flash, which is great. I'm not limited by my equipment in that way. So now that we know what flash we're going to use, we now have to figure out how do we set up our camera for flash. So the first thing you have to do, if you're shooting a mirrorless camera, so a camera that uses an electronic viewfinder, you need to go into your settings and turn off exposure preview. Fuji has it, Nikon has it, all the different brands have it. There's a setting that will turn off exposure preview. And the reason is, let's say you want to underexpose by 2 or 3 stops, and then you want to fill the rest in with your flash. Your viewfinder might look super dark or black altogether, depending on if you're shooting at night. And so you're not able to compose correctly. So if you turn off exposure preview, your camera will compensate and show you what it thinks is like a regular scene and show you like a correct amount of light. And then you can use your flash and you can have both composition, be able to compose your scene, and get the light from your flash, which is really what you want. And if you shoot an SLR or a rangefinder, don't worry about it. You don't have to do any of that because you're seeing like real life. Once you turn off exposure compensation, you now need to adjust your sync speed. So on a lot of cameras, you'll have a different color shutter speed, an X or a lightning bolt on your shutter speed dial, or it'll just be a setting in your camera. So if you're shooting like a Nikon or something, they might have some different things inside of it. But really, you'll see on my camera, I have a little X by the 250th, and that means I have to keep my shutter speed at 250th or below on Fujifilm. And so this way it can catch the flash, because flashes are super quick and the camera won't sync up with it if you shoot at 500. For example, if I shoot at 500 on this camera, I might actually get half the flash, so you'll see like the top half of the frame's dark and the bottom half of the frame's bright, which could be a cool effect if that's what you're going for. But if I'm trying to illuminate the whole scene, I want to make sure I'm at my sync speed or below. There are a couple exceptions to this where you actually don't have to worry about having a sync speed on your camera. If you shoot an X100V or a camera with a leaf shutter, those are not sensitive to having a sync speed. So you could shoot at 1/1000th with a flash and you're good to go. The other exception is if your flash is capable of high-speed sync and you have that setting turned on. We'll go more into what high-speed sync is later. It's not something I really recommend for street photography, but it is an option. So your shooting mode matters a lot when you're shooting flash. I highly recommend you just keep it in manual. It's simpler and you actually know exactly what's happening with every aspect of the exposure triangle and flash exposure, so you get full control over your photo and you know what the final result's gonna look like. You can shoot in aperture priority. It will be a little funky because when you're in aperture priority, you set your aperture and then it adjusts the shutter speed. And that can run into problems when you have a sync speed. So if your sync speed is 1/250th, then if your shutter speed priority shoots you over, then it's gonna look a little funky or may miss the flash altogether, or the camera will have trouble compensating for light because it's only limited to the 250th shutter speed. Same thing for shutter speed priority. If you're in shutter speed priority, it will automatically adjust the aperture. But flash is really sensitive to aperture, so it might not give you the correct amount of light. It may work if you have a TTL flash, it might be enjoyable, but overall, I think the better option is just to stay in manual mode, so you know exactly how all of your settings changes will affect your final exposure. Then the last thing is your curtain sync. So some cameras, you can't change this. I think on a lot of film cameras, it just kind of is what it is. But on digital cameras, you can set it to either first curtain sync or rear curtain sync. So if you think of your flash as two curtains, so one goes up, then the other one follows. This is the first one, this is the second one. And so the flash can be timed to be on the first curtain. So as the flash starts, it'll time it with this curtain, or you can time the flash to deploy at kind of the end of your exposure. I think that it's the most interesting to put it at the end, just because I like the subject to be pretty much frozen at the end of the image, and if there's any shutter drag, it kind of wisps or flows away from them. But this is all personal preference. This is one I encourage you to just play around with, see what you like. It's really a preference thing. Some people like first curtain sync, some people like rear curtain sync, some people have no idea that this setting's even on their camera and they just shoot flash as is. It's not that important. It's just important if you do a lot of shutter drag. My flash setup is very simple. I keep my camera in manual mode, I use rear curtain sync, and I turn off my exposure preview. Or if I'm shooting with the Fuji, sometimes I'll just use the OVF and then I'm set. So now that you've picked out your flash and we've set up your camera correctly, we now have to understand, how do you actually shoot flash? So I like to think of flash as two exposures. You have your base exposure and your flash exposure. So let's dig into what the base exposure looks like. So your base exposure is kind of what you have as your regular picture. What does your scene look like? How do you want that exposed? And that's controlled by your classic exposure triangle. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. That's really straightforward. And this is because you're just trying to make an exposure for the background or for the ambient part of the scene. Then you have the more complicated part, which is your flash exposure. This is the light you want to add to the scene. And this is controlled by your flash power, your aperture, and your ISO. Because the flash is super fast, it's like 1/10,000th of a second or something like that, your shutter speed does not have any effect on the flash. What has a big effect is how sensitive your film is, so your ISO or your sensor, and how small or large of a hole you have for your aperture. The smaller the aperture, the less light that's going to come through. And so when you shoot a picture, it's very simple to just think about it as, what do I want the background to look like? Good, got my exposure set for that. Now let me adjust my flash power or my aperture a little bit to compensate for the additional light I'm gonna add to the scene. And now you might be thinking, okay, well, how much power should I add? Do I add a lot of flash power? Do I add a little bit of flash power? Do I open up my aperture? How do I adjust my settings? There are two ways to do this. There's one that my college photo professor would absolutely hate that I think is super easy. And there's one that is the more traditional method. So the first one requires a digital camera, and it's super simple. You just take a base exposure using your rear screen to evaluate the brightness, and then add flash, and then just mess with your settings till you get an image on the back that looks the way you want it to. I think the real technique here is, though, I like to set this up for a subject that's about 6 feet from me, and that's typically where my subjects are when I'm shooting street photography, so I kind of know in advance what this is gonna look like, and then make adjustments based on, okay, I know my image is good at 6 feet. If they're 3 feet from me, then I'll change these settings. And we'll discuss how to actually change that when your subject distance changes, because flash is very sensitive to distance. The other option is to use a flash meter. And I currently don't know where my flash meter is. It's buried somewhere in the basement, which shows you about how much I use that option. But if you shoot film, it's kind of the best and only way to do it. The way it works is it's very similar. You take a reading, and then you grab your flash, and then you fire your flash, and it will tell you what your aperture should be. And if your aperture is too small, then you need to compensate. If your aperture is too big, then you need to compensate. If it's correct on your camera, then you nailed it. And so it's very straightforward, and it's just like using the rear screen, but without the visual feedback. So you don't know exactly what it's gonna look like. But that's the fun of shooting film. And if you're using a TTL flash, this solves for a lot of this. This is all too complicated. It will pretty much just add flash into your photo without overexposing anything. So you can underexpose the background however much you want to, and then pump in the flash and it'll take care of it for you. So in order to really meter correctly, we have to understand a little bit of physics, and we're gonna revisit our old friend, the inverse square law. So this one is like one photographers talk about all the time, and it is not that complicated, but it is a little bit complicated. So how this works is the inverse square law says your intensity of light is equal to 1 over the distance squared. So that sounds like gibberish, and I promise I'm gonna make it very straightforward. If I am standing about 6 feet from my subject, and I have my flash set at 1/8 power, and if my subject moves from 6 feet to 12 feet, they've doubled the distance between us. And if they've doubled the distance between us, then 2 squared is 4, which then means I need to emit 4 times as much flash power. So if I'm at 1/8 flash power, I actually now need to bump it up to 1/2 flash power. So 1/8 times 4, 1/2. And so now you've compensated to get the same level of exposure on the subject. So same thing if my subject moves closer. So if my subject is at 6 feet and I'm at 1/8 flash power, and they move to 3 feet, then they have halved the amount of distance. That's a factor of 2. We now do 2 squared, and that gets you 4. So I need actually 4 times less flash. So if I'm at 1/8, 1/8 divided by 4 is 1/32, and so I need 1/32 power. So there you go. Now you understand the inverse square law. The other interesting thing is you don't have to change your flash power. Let's say I'm at 1/8 and my subject is twice as far as they were before, so they went from 6 feet to 12 feet. I can go up 2 stops on either my aperture, because aperture has an effect on flash, or on my ISO, because ISO also has an effect on flash. Same thing if they get twice as close, so if they go from 6 feet to 3 feet, then I can adjust by 2 stops down so I don't overcook them. So I can go from, f8 to f16, and then the photo still looks good. I can also go from ISO 800 down to ISO 200, and the photo still looks good. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. It's, kind of intuitive as you start to shoot a bit of flash. And in the real world, I never think about any of this. I just know as my subject gets closer, I need to turn down the flash. As they get further away, I need to turn up the flash or adjust my settings appropriately. A hack I like to use a lot is I will actually just take my flash, so if I have it in my hand, and I will just pull it back. So this way I don't have to worry about anything. So if they are, if I'm shooting at 6 feet and they come to 3 feet, I just put my arm back, and that's pretty close to 3 feet. My arm's like maybe 2 feet, 2.5 feet. And flash is pretty forgiving in terms of exposure if you're off by like a stop or two. So it's not the worst. So that's an easy solution. And if they move farther away, I just kind of shove my hand forward. That one is a little tough because if they move, too far back, I will have to change things. But, shoving your hand forward and janking down your aperture ring really quick to get to like f4, that works pretty darn well. So finally, you've learned everything you need to know to go shoot flash. Now we get to do the fun part of actually talking about flash and flash techniques and how we can use it as an artistic, creative thing, not just the technical nitty-gritties of how flash exposure works. Let's talk about off-camera flash. You have 2 options for flash typically in this regard. You can have it mounted to your camera, or you can do what I do and use it off of your camera. And I think off-camera flash is really cool because it gives you the capability to really change how you want your flash to look. So for example, if I want the light to come from up top, I can just put my flash up over the subject. If I want to have the light coming from the side, I can just put the flash to the side of my subject. I think there's a lot of room to play with this, and you can do some really interesting things. For example, like a side light looks really nice when the subject's backlit. It almost makes it look like the light is like wrapping around them. Or the overhead light I like just because it's kind of a little more natural because most light comes from the sun, or comes from above you. So it makes your photos look a little less, direct flashy, but you can also just shoot it straight on, which, if you feel like doing that, you can just pop it in the hot shoe and save yourself the headache of dealing with this cable. But straight on also looks good. That gives you a very like party paparazzi look. There's just a bajillion options to play with. Another cool technique is shutter drag. I love using shutter drag because it's one of those things where your eyes can't see it. You don't know what it's gonna look like. So there's a little bit of surprise. It's kind of like shooting film or like something expired or something, just like adding some randomness to your process. And so how you do that is very straightforward. You take your shutter speed and you crank it down from wherever you were at to, I don't know if it's gonna focus, there you go, all the way down to like 1/4 of a second or 1/8 of a second. Something where you're gonna get motion blur, and then you actually just keep it kind of unstable. I mean, you don't have to, but at 1/4 of a second, it's kind of fun. If you intentionally move the camera, or if the subject's running, you're gonna get some motion blur, and then you use the flash to freeze the motion, which is awesome because the flash exposure is somewhere like, I don't know, it's in like thousandths of seconds. So it's very quick. So you can get a really cool look with it. Daylight fill flash is also super interesting. It's really simple and straightforward. You pretty much just expose like normal and have a flash to fill in the shadows. You maybe underexpose like a little bit, but it creates a really pastel-y look when you're shooting in color. For some reason, it just makes colors really blend and pop in an interesting way. I don't know how to describe it. And the other option is you shoot it in black and white and you get this really crispy look because it's filling in all that shadow detail. There's really no right or wrong way to do it, and it's definitely a fun one to experiment with. So another option is shooting motion with high-speed sync. High-speed sync is unique because it doesn't just shoot one flash. It actually shoots out a bunch of little flashes over and over and over during the time while your shutter's open. And so what this allows you to do is shoot at 1/1000th of a second and have your flash deploy. And so that looks really cool. The only issue is you might need a special flash, so not every flash can do it, and your flash will not be able to function at full power. When it's putting out that much light, it actually might need to be on a flash that is set to like 1/8 power or something like that. But it's another thing to experiment with. A lot of people use it for like sports and stuff because you get the flash look without any of the blur. But I don't really spend a lot of time with it. So this is an opportunity for you to explore and see how it works for your street photography. So I've just told you a bunch of ways to shoot flash, but what do I actually do is different than, all the options. Obviously, I like to shoot flash in a variety of scenarios, just based on what I've explained so far. But in terms of like how I do it in a very practical sense, I often shoot flash at night. During the day, I like to rely on daylight if I have it, just because I think it looks really nice. But at night, it's really hard to shoot and get really nice images because you have a lot of just lack of light. You don't have a lot of light. And so those settings for that, I usually try and keep my aperture around f8 so I don't have to worry about a ton of depth of field. I try and keep my shutter speed kind of somewhere random. Sometimes it's 1/250th if I want everything really sharp. Other times I'll put it at like 1/4 if I feel like the scene needs some drag. And then in terms of flash power, I like to keep it around 1/8. And I think 1/8 is kind of a sweet spot, particularly for these smaller flashes that you keep in your hand, because they refresh really fast. So you can shoot a couple frames and you're not immediately waiting for like 2 seconds or 3 seconds for the flash to recharge. It's good to go. Which, you know, when you shoot flash, you don't always get that luxury. Sometimes when you shoot the first frame, the subject notices or the moment's kind of bruised after that. But other times, people really lean into it and then you have an opportunity to get a couple extra frames. So I like to be ready for all of that. Hence why I keep it at 1/8 of a second. And obviously it's just a starting point and just my opinion, right? So use those settings as you will, but also experiment like crazy because it's just another variable within your street photography arsenal. And we really don't get that many variables. You get shutter speed, ISO, aperture, and now you have flash power. It's like unlocking a whole new extra element in the periodic table. It's a pretty large and substantial thing you can do for your photography. So we do have to address the elephant in the room, which is how do you build up the confidence to go out and actually use a flash and photograph strangers with the flash? And I can tell you it's not as bad as you might think. Both Bruce Gilden and Mark Cohen have all of their teeth. Last I checked, I don't actually know, but they seem all right, and so you can probably do it too. The easiest way is just start by photographing your friends. If you're hanging out with your friends, bring your camera to the bar with you. If you're sitting out by the street corner doing whatever, I don't know, skateboarding, however you spend your time, bring your camera and bring a flash and start using your flash. This will be a great opportunity for you to learn how it works in a variety of scenarios and also learn how to dial in your settings quickly. That's, I think, the biggest part of shooting flash is figuring out how to be prepared for it. And when you're in a low stakes environments with your friends, pretty easy. Once you've built up some confidence and some understanding with your tools by shooting your friends, go to an event, go to a festival, a protest, a rally, whatever it is, whatever you have around you, go to that and bring your flash. That's a great environment for shooting flash because people are much more receptive to being photographed in general. They know they're in public, these are usually crowded places, and they're much more relaxed because they're in a good mood, they're having fun at the event. I think it's a pretty great place to really cut your teeth shooting flash. Then once you've shot events and you want to shoot in a time that's not exactly a public event or your friends, start by doing street portraits. Street portraits with the flash is a great way to just start striking up conversations with strangers and build up some confidence during just like your regular day. So if you're out on just a random Saturday taking pictures, that'd be a really good way to do it. At some point, you just got to rip the Band-Aid off and send it and go take some photos with your flash. I think it's just a little bit different than your regular day-to-day street photography because you can't just pop the flash off all the time. A, you're gonna end up messing with the wrong person if you're not careful how you approach flash. But B, you're also gonna bruise the scene every time the flash goes off. People will notice that the flash went off and then they're not gonna be as loose or as whatever you were targeting the first time. So there is an element of shooting a little bit more judiciously when you have a flash. So now that you know all of this new flash knowledge, you should go out and use it and get weird with it. Try something different. You always have your standard shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Now you have this new thing called flash and you have this added light that you can use. There's so many other flash techniques we didn't discuss during this video that you could do. You can leave your shutter open super long and pop off multiple flashes. You can add color gels. The world's really your oyster when it comes to flash, and it's something that you should really explore because you really only do have the 3 settings on your regular camera. Now you've added a 4th. It's just another dimension to play with that can really change your photography or pull you out of a rut or just give you another option when you're shooting a scene and trying to decide how do you want this to look. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. That will really help me make more of these videos in the future. Also, if you have any questions or ideas for future videos, please leave them in the comments down below and I'll be happy to answer them. So until the next one, I'll see you guys in the streets. See ya.